Richard Cavendish had everything the world promised would bring happiness: a sprawling ocean view mansion, private jets, employees who called him sir before speaking, and a name that made boardrooms go silent. But behind all the walls of glass and marble, his nights were lonelier than anyone could imagine. Every morning began the same way: 6 a.m. sharp. His butler, George, would open the curtains to let in the sunlight, and Richard would already be on his tablet, scrolling through endless financial reports. The glow of numbers replaced the warmth of human touch. His empire, Cavendish Global Holdings, was his child, his obsession, and his cage. Down the grand staircase, his wife, Clarissa, waited. Once radiant and full of laughter, she had become a reflection of silence. When they first met, she was a struggling artist, gentle, curious, and full of life, but 25 years of being second place to his business had dimmed that spark. At breakfast, she spoke softly. "You'll be home late again." Richard didn't look up. "You know how it is. Board meeting in Tokyo, video call at 10. "I'll try." The word try had become his default excuse. Clarissa smiled faintly, but her eyes were tired. "You've been trying for 20 years, Richard." He didn't respond, just sipped his coffee. The sound of the spoon against porcelain was the only thing that spoke. That morning, when he left for work, Clarissa stood by the window, watching the black Bentley disappear down the long driveway. What Richard didn't see was the man waiting just beyond the hedge, a man she'd been meeting in secret for months. The affair didn't start with passion, it started with loneliness. Clarissa had begged her husband for time, for touch, for intimacy, but every time he returned from business trips, he was too exhausted, too distant. She convinced herself she deserved to feel wanted again, but guilt followed her like a shadow. Richard, on the other hand, felt something wrong but couldn't name it. He'd wake up at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, staring at the empty side of the bed. His heart felt heavier each day, though he never admitted it to anyone. The man who could solve billion-dollar crises couldn't fix his own marriage. He thought success could heal everything, but he was wrong. One afternoon, Richard came home earlier than usual. His meeting in Zurich had been cancelled, and he thought, maybe today I'll surprise her. Maybe tonight, we'll talk, we'll start over. As he walked into the house, the echo of laughter floated down from upstairs. Clarissa's laughter. He hadn't heard its sound in months, but it wasn't for him. When he opened the bedroom door, the world stopped. Clarissa froze. The man beside her stammered, trying to cover himself, but the sight was already burned into Richard's mind. For a second, no one moved. Then Richard's body swayed, his vision blurred. The rage, the disbelief, the heartbreak, it all surged at once. He clutched his chest. "Clarissa, why?" She tried to speak, but her words drowned in silence. Then everything went dark. Richard awoke hours later, his arm connected to an IV drip. Machines beeped steadily beside him. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air. "Mr. Cavendish, can you hear me?" a gentle voice asked. He blinked and saw her, a young nurse with bright eyes and calm hands. Her name tag read Lila Mendez. She couldn't have been more than 24. "Where am I?" "You're at Street Helena's hospital," she said softly. "You had a hypertensive crisis, but you're stable now." He tried to sit up, but she placed a hand on his arm. "Please, don't. You need rest." Her touch, gentle, deliberate, was something he hadn't felt in years. She noticed the tears forming at the edge of his eyes. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" He turned his face away. "No one." Lila hesitated but didn't press further. Instead, she adjusted his pillow and quietly said, "Then I'll be here for now." Something about her voice, the honesty, the empathy, pierced through the fog of pain. Over the next few days, Lila became his routine. She checked his vitals, brought his meals, and sometimes, just sat by his side, listening to him speak about his past. One evening, as the sunset painted the hospital room gold, Richard said quietly, "You know, Nurse Mendez, I built an empire but never learned how to build a home." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. He chuckled bitterly. "In 40 years of marriage, I was intimate with my wife 3 times. 3. Lila blinked, surprised. He continued, "I was too busy proving myself to the world, and when I finally looked up, I'd lost everything that mattered." There was no arrogance in his tone, only regret. He turned his head toward her. "Do you know what loneliness does to a man, Lila? It eats away your soul until even breathing feels like punishment." She swallowed hard. "I can imagine, but you're still here. That means you still have the chance to heal." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I don't think time is on my side anymore." There was a pause. Then he said something that made her heart stop. "Lila, May I ask you something personal? She hesitated. Of course. If you were me, if you were dying, and you had one last wish, would you ask for someone to hold you, just so you don't feel alone anymore? Her breath caught. I don't know. He nodded slowly. Then let me be honest. That's my wish. I don't want to die feeling like a stranger to affection. The air in the room grew still. Lila's mind raced, torn between her duty as a nurse and the raw humanity of his plea. He wasn't asking for desire. He was asking for connection. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat in the staff lounge, staring at her reflection in the vending machine glass. Her colleague, Nurse Amika, noticed. You look troubled. Patient issues. Lila nodded. There's this man. He's dying. And he asked me for something I don't know if I can give. Amika tilted her head. If it's not medical, be careful. We're here to heal, not to fill emotional voids. Lila sighed. But sometimes healing is emotional. Sometimes people die not because their body fails, but because their soul gives up. Amika didn't reply, but her silence said she understood. The next morning, Lila entered Richard's room with a small smile. He looked weaker, the lines on his face deeper, the fire in his eyes dimming. Morning, Mr. Cavendish, she said softly. He managed a smile. Morning, Lila. There was a long pause. Finally, she said, about your wish. I don't know if I can promise everything you asked for, but I promise I'll make sure you don't feel alone again, not for the rest of your days. Tears welled in his eyes. That's more than I deserve. For the first time in decades, Richard Cavendish smiled not as a billionaire, but as a man simply grateful to be seen. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. The next day, the hospital felt quieter than usual. The hum of machines and distant footsteps created a rhythm that somehow felt like a heartbeat. Lila entered Richard's room carrying a tray of carefully prepared food, chicken soup, freshly squeezed juice, and a small bowl of fruit. Richard was sitting upright, supported by pillows, his eyes fixed on the window. The morning sun cast soft gold across his pale face. He looked fragile, yet there was a quiet dignity about him, a man accustomed to control, now humbled by circumstance. Good morning, Lila said softly, placing the tray beside him. Richard turned toward her, his gaze sharp but tinged with vulnerability. Good morning, Nurse Mendez. You're here early. I like to start the day calmly, she replied. It helps me be ready for anything the hospital throws at me. He chuckled faintly, the sound rough but genuine. I envy your optimism. Lila smiled. She noticed the tremor in his hand as he reached for the juice. Would you like me to help you with that? She asked, moving closer. No, I want to try, he insisted. He grasped the cup with effort, wincing slightly. Lila stayed close, ready to assist if he faltered. And then it happened. A small moment of shared humanity. His hand brushed hers for a second while adjusting the tray, and they both froze, aware of the fleeting connection. Richard cleared his throat, breaking the silence. You know, you have a remarkable way of making people feel safe. Lila looked at him, a bit surprised. I just do my job. No, he said softly, eyes meeting hers. You do more than that. You make people seen. That's rare. The room was quiet again, but now charged with something unspoken, the beginning of trust. Over the next hour, they spoke more freely. Richard shared snippets of his life, the board meetings, the power struggles, the constant pressure to perform. But he also shared what he rarely told anyone, his loneliness, his fear of dying unknown in a house full of things but no one to love. Lila listened, offering no judgment, just empathy. She asked questions gently. What did you love most about your marriage? He hesitated, then sighed. I loved her laugh, her curiosity about the world, but I spent too much time building walls instead of opening doors. She nodded, feeling the weight of unspoken regrets between them. Sometimes the world doesn't teach us how to love ourselves enough to share it, she said softly. Richard's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I suppose, you've already given me something no one else could. Your attention, your patience. That evening, Lila performed a small, simple act. She read aloud from a book of poetry he had always loved but never had time to enjoy. Richard listened, mesmerized by the cadence of her voice, each word seeming to fill a void he didn't even know existed. You make this so easy to listen to, he murmured. It's comforting. like someone is finally speaking to my soul instead of my portfolio. For Lila, it wasn't just reading, it was giving him presence, the kind of attention that reminded him he was human, not a title, not an empire, not a statistic in the world's ledger. Days passed, and their interactions deepened. Lila noticed the small ways he reacted, a smile when she corrected his posture gently, a sigh of relief when she adjusted the blanket, a subtle nod of approval when she anticipated his needs without being asked. For Richard, her presence became the highlight of the day. He looked forward to her visits not just for care but for the comfort of being understood. And slowly, cautiously, he began opening up about more personal matters, memories of childhood, dreams he never pursued, regrets he wished he could undo. One afternoon, as they watched the sun set together through the hospital window, Richard spoke quietly. "Lila, do you ever feel like people only notice you when you're in pain?" She considered this. "Sometimes, but I think real connections happen when someone chooses to see beyond the pain. That's what makes it meaningful." He looked at her, eyes searching. "You choose to see beyond. You see me, not the billionaire, not the man everyone fears or envies, but me." Her heart ached at the honesty in his voice. Here was a man stripped of power, stripped of pretense, laying bare his vulnerability, and for the first time, she felt something stir inside her, not obligation, not pity, but genuine compassion. Despite the connection, Richard was cautious. His life had taught him that not everyone had pure intentions. He hesitated to fully trust Lila, worried that this young nurse might one day leave, returning him to the loneliness he feared most. "Why do you care so much?" he asked one evening, his voice low, almost vulnerable. Lila paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because someone once cared for me when I was scared, and now I have the chance to do the same for someone else. That's all." Richard studied her, surprised by the simplicity and honesty of her answer. No hidden agenda, no expectation of reward, just kindness. He realized then that what he had thought was a simple nurse-patient relationship had become something far more significant. Their bond deepened through small rituals, morning greetings with a smile, shared meals, quiet conversations, and even moments of silence where presence alone was enough. One night, as Richard lay resting, he turned to Lila. "You've done more for me than I thought possible. You've reminded me what it feels like to be alive, to be cared for, to matter." Lila's eyes welled up, but she remained composed. "I'm glad I could help. That's what I'm here for." He grasped her hand gently. "No, you've done more than help. You've given me a chance at dignity, at connection, something I didn't think I'd ever have." For the first time, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope, not the hollow hope of wealth or status, but the profound hope that someone could truly see him, flaws and all, and still care. One rainy evening, the hospital lights reflected on the wet pavement outside. Richard and Lila sat together by the window, sharing stories about childhood dreams. Richard laughed softly. "I once wanted to be a painter. Can you imagine it?" Lila smiled. "I can. You have the eyes of someone who appreciates detail. The precision would have served you well." He looked at her with something like, "Oh, you really make me feel human again." She shook her head gently. "You've always been human, Richard. You just forgot how to let yourself feel it." At that moment, a small understanding passed between them, a silent agreement that their connection was about more than life and death. It was about healing, seeing, and being present. Then came the pivotal moment. Richard, in a rare show of vulnerability, whispered, "Lila, I think I've finally realized what matters most in life. It's not the empire, it's these moments, connection, kindness. I don't know how much time I have left, but I want it to matter." Lila reached out, gently holding his hand. "Then let's make it matter, one moment at a time." Richard closed his eyes, allowing himself to simply be. For a man who had controlled every aspect of life for 79 years, surrendering to trust and presence was the greatest gift he had ever received, and Lila, with her quiet courage and compassion, was giving it to him freely. Weeks passed, and Richard's recovery slowly progressed, but it was the presence of Lila that made the difference between mere survival and rediscovering life. Their routine evolved into a delicate dance of mutual respect and quiet intimacy. Mornings began with shared laughter as Richard fumbled with his breakfast tray, joking about how hospital porridge tasted like powdered ambition. Lila would roll her eyes but laugh nonetheless, adjusting his fork with gentle patience. "Miss Mendez," he said one morning, a faint smile tugging at his lips, "you know, I never thought a nurse could make a man feel like a human again. You're just now realizing that." She teased softly. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Better late than never, I suppose." Their conversations moved beyond the superficial. Richard spoke of his childhood, the pressure to succeed, the absence of parental warmth, the loneliness of wealth. Lila shared stories of her own struggles, working multiple jobs to put herself through nursing school, and the dreams she still held close to her heart. Through these exchanges, trust solidified. Richard began to anticipate her presence before she even arrived. He'd have a book ready for her to read aloud, or a small drawing of a garden he once loved, hoping she'd find joy in its colors. Lila, in turn, found herself inspired by his vulnerability. The man who seemed untouchable in the world of business had an innocence when stripped of his armor, and she honored it without judgment. Even the hospital staff began to notice. Dr. Reynolds, the attending physician, commented one day, "He's never been so responsive, and he smiles a lot. Whatever you're doing, Nurse Mendez, keep doing it." Lila smiled quietly. Sometimes healing doesn't just come from medicine, doctor. Despite the growing connection, whispers began to circulate. Some nurses eyed Lila with suspicion, questioning her closeness to the billionaire patient. "It's too personal," one remarked. Clarissa, Richard's estranged wife, eventually caught wind of the bond forming. A mix of jealousy and regret simmered beneath her composed exterior. She visited the hospital under the guise of concern, only to find Lila reading poetry to Richard. Clarissa's presence made the room tense. "Richard, why are you laughing?" she asked, forcing a strained smile. He looked up, the smile faltering. "Because she makes me feel alive, something I haven't felt in years." Clarissa's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. As the days passed, the real obstacle emerged. Richard, aware of his mortality, confided in Lila one evening as they watched the hospital garden in twilight. "Lila, I don't have much time left, but there's something I want, something I can't bear to leave undone." She hesitated. "What is it, sir?" He looked at her earnestly. "I want one final connection, a moment of intimacy, not out of lust, but to feel alive, to feel human before I go." Lila froze. Her heart raced. This wasn't part of her training, and yet she understood the depth of his request. It was raw, honest, and vulnerable. She could see the years of loneliness etched in the lines of his face, the empire that couldn't buy warmth, the betrayal that had left him broken. I don't know if I can," she whispered, torn between professional ethics and the undeniable human need before her. Richard's eyes softened. "I don't want to hurt you, I only want connection. If you can't, I will understand." It was a test of trust, courage, and compassion. Lila knew this decision could change both their lives forever, for better or worse. That night, Lila wrestled with her conscience. She sat on her small apartment balcony, the city lights below twinkling like distant stars. Could she bridge the gap between professional boundaries and profound human need? She thought of her own life, nights spent alone, the countless patients who had begged for comfort, and the rare moments when she had been able to make a difference. This is bigger than rules. This is about humanity. Her mind returned to Richard's words, "I want to feel alive, to feel human." In the quiet of her room, she made her choice. She would act with compassion, with clear boundaries, but without denying his need for human connection. The next day, Richard greeted her with his usual faint smile, unaware of her decision. Lila entered the room, carrying a bouquet of freshly picked flowers from the hospital garden. "They're for you," she said softly, placing them beside his bed. Richard's eyes lit up. "You didn't have to." "Thank you, Lila. I wanted to," she replied, her voice steady. The gesture was small, yet powerful. Richard reached for her hand instinctively, holding it for a longer moment than before. He felt gratitude, trust, and a fragile sense of hope. They sat in companionable silence, the unspoken understanding hanging between them. Neither pushed boundaries unnecessarily, but the room was charged with an intimacy that transcended words. Not everyone supported Lila's choice. Some colleagues questioned her motives. "Are you sure this is appropriate?" one nurse asked. Lila shook her head. "It's not about me, it's about him, about giving him the dignity and connection he deserves in his final days." Richard, meanwhile, felt the weight of societal judgment. Even in the hospital, he worried that people would misunderstand the bond, but the trust in Lila's eyes reassured him. Despite her resolve, Lila faced moments of doubt. She worried that she might be crossing lines she could never undo. She worried about her own safety and reputation, but she also knew something crucial. If she didn't act, Richard's final days would pass in solitude, his heart unfulfilled, and his soul unhealed. Late one night, she whispered to herself, "Compassion isn't always easy, but it's always right." The days that followed were a series of shared small acts, reading poetry, tending to the garden, sharing meals. Richard opened up like never before, and Lila's presence became the anchor he didn't know he needed. During one particularly emotional evening, Richard whispered, "Lila, if I leave this world tomorrow, I want you to know, you've reminded me that life isn't about wealth or power, it's about connection, trust, and kindness. You've given me that, and I'll carry it with me forever." Lila's eyes shimmered. "And you've reminded me why I became a nurse, to heal more than just bodies, but hearts too." As Richard's health fluctuated, Lila remained steadfast. Every setback, every spike in blood pressure, every moment of pain, was met with calm presence and unwavering support. The hospital staff began to notice the transformation in both of them. Richard was calmer, more open, and more reflective. Lila's compassion inspired those around her to see the impact of emotional care alongside medical treatment. But the looming question remained, would she fulfill the billionaire's deepest, most vulnerable request? And if she did, what would it mean for both of them, morally, emotionally, and ethically? The days grew shorter, and the golden sunlight of early autumn streamed through the hospital windows. Richard's body remained fragile, but his spirit began to heal in ways that no medicine alone could provide. Lila's quiet determination had created a sanctuary, a space where vulnerability was safe and trust could flourish. One afternoon, as a gentle rain tapped against the glass, Richard whispered, "Lila, I feel alive, truly alive, even if it's just a moment at a time." Lila smiled. "That's all anyone can ask for, sir, just presence, just connection." The hospital staff, initially skeptical, had grown accustomed to their bond. Dr. Reynolds approached Lila one morning, hesitant but sincere. "I'll admit, I doubted this at first, but I've never seen a patient recover in spirit like he has with you around. You've gone above and beyond, and he's thriving because of it." Richard overheard and gave a small, knowing smile. He knew Lila's actions were not just acts of professional care, they were acts of human kindness that transcended convention. One evening, the hospital room was bathed in warm light. Richard lay resting, his breathing slow and deliberate. Lila sat beside him, gently brushing back a lock of hair from his forehead. "I want you to know, what I ask of you isn't about desire," he said softly. "It's about being seen, feeling human one last time before the world takes me." Lila took a deep breath. She had wrestled with this moment, balancing morality, compassion, and the raw truth of his need. She leaned forward, taking his trembling hand in both of hers, offering warmth and presence. For that moment, no titles, no wealth, no regrets existed, only two human beings sharing connection, empathy, and trust. Richard felt it, deeply. It was a balm for decades of loneliness and betrayal, a moment that reminded him of what it meant to be alive. When it was over, they both sat quietly. No words were necessary. Lila's presence had fulfilled the final piece of his soul's longing, and Richard was at peace. The impact of this small, human act rippled far beyond the room. Richard's health, though still delicate, stabilized. His outlook changed. He spoke of gratitude, joy, and appreciation for moments rather than milestones. Lila noticed the shift immediately. He laughed more freely, smiled without restraint, and even began asking about the lives of other patients in the hospital. His empire, once his entire identity, now seemed secondary to the awareness that human kindness mattered more than money. Richard also began to reconcile with his past. He reached out to Clarissa, seeking closure. "I don't hold anger anymore," he said gently. "I want us both to find peace." Clarissa, confronted with the depth of his transformation, found the courage to step away from bitterness and regret. Lila watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. She had helped him regain his dignity, but she had also witnessed a man rediscover the humanity that money and power had never given him. Weeks later, the hospital garden bloomed in bright colors. Richard sat in a wheelchair, enjoying the sunlight, Lila by his side. But now, it was different. The man who once depended on her for emotional survival had begun to give back. Together, they organized a small charity for young nurses and underprivileged patients. Richard used his resources to fund educational programs and hospital support, but he did it with humility and grace, guided by the lessons Lila had shown him, that compassion and kindness were far more valuable than wealth. Lila, for her part, had grown confident and empowered. Her courage in navigating the moral complexities of helping Richard had strengthened her resolve to continue providing care that healed hearts as well as bodies. She became a mentor to other nurses, teaching them that empathy was a skill to cultivate, just like medicine. One afternoon, as children from the charity played in the garden, Richard turned to Lila with a gentle smile. "You've changed my world, Lila. Not just my last days, but my entire perspective. I don't think I'll ever stop being grateful." She shook her head softly, tears in her eyes. "You did the work yourself, Richard. I only helped you see it. He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey, from loneliness and fear to trust, connection, and transformation. The story didn't end in that hospital room. Word of Lila's compassion and Richard's transformation spread throughout the city, inspiring nurses, doctors, and ordinary people to reconsider what it meant to truly care. Lila continued to mentor young nurses, showing them that sometimes, the smallest acts, holding a hand, reading a story, offering presents, could change someone's life forever. Richard's philanthropic efforts grew into a foundation dedicated to human connection, emphasizing the importance of emotional care in healthcare institutions. His empire remained, but it now served humanity rather than feeding ambition alone. The billionaire who had once measured life in profits and milestones had learned to measure it in moments of kindness and human connection. The final night before Richard left the hospital, he called Lila to his side. "Lila, thank you for everything. I feel complete. I have no regrets. I've been seen, understood, and cared for in a way I never thought possible." She held his hand, her own tears glistening. "You taught me too, Richard. You reminded me why compassion matters, why connection is everything." He smiled, a soft, serene smile. "Promise me you'll continue to help others, even when I'm gone." "I promise," she whispered. And in that quiet, golden-lit room, they both understood the truth, that the smallest acts of kindness, the moments of courage to connect and care, could transform lives, not just one, but countless others. Months after Richard's hospitalization, the world saw a transformed man. His health remained fragile, but his spirit was renewed. No longer consumed by the endless race of his empire, he dedicated himself to philanthropy, focusing on initiatives that promoted emotional well-being alongside financial support. The foundation he and Lila established grew rapidly, funding mentorship programs for young nurses, hospital support for underprivileged patients, and community initiatives designed to foster human connection. Richard's personal relationships, too, found a new balance. He reached a quiet reconciliation with Clarissa, not as lovers but as two people acknowledging the years they shared, understanding that closure could be found without bitterness. His employees noticed a new calmness in their leader, a man who now measured success not in profits, but in positive impact. Lila, just 24 when their paths first crossed, emerged as a force of compassionate leadership. Her courage in navigating the complex emotional landscape of her patient's final wish inspired other nurses and healthcare workers. She became a mentor and trainer, teaching that empathy, presence, and small acts of kindness could change lives as profoundly as medicine itself. Her story spread throughout the medical community and beyond, showing that age or experience doesn't limit the ability to make a profound difference in someone's life. This story is a testament to the power of human kindness. It reminds us that wealth, power, and status can never replace compassion, attention, and understanding. True fulfillment is not in the empire one builds or the accolades one earns. It lies in the moments we take to see, hear, and care for others. Richard Cavendish's life, once defined by ambition and isolation, became a story of redemption through empathy. Lila's courage to act with heart, even in the face of ethical dilemmas, changed not only his final days but created a ripple effect touching countless others. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, carries the power to heal, transform, and inspire. Sometimes, it is the simplest gestures, holding a hand, offering a moment of presence, or choosing to understand another's pain, that leave the most lasting impact. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us. If this story touched your heart, please like this video. It helps more people discover these inspiring stories. Subscribe for more tales of human kindness that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for opportunities in your own life to be someone's unexpected blessing. What act of kindness will you perform this week? Share your commitment in the comments below. And remember, even the smallest gesture can change someone's entire world. Richard and Lila's journey shows us that compassion is not limited by age, circumstance, or social standing. One person's courage to care can ignite a chain of hope, healing, and transformation that extends far beyond a single moment. And in a world that often feels cold and transactional, stories like theirs remind us that human connection, genuine, selfless, and kind, is the most precious gift we can offer and receive. The billionaire's last wish was not just fulfilled, it became a movement, a living testament to the truth that kindness, courage, and empathy are what make life meaningful.